Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, the 5 things you need to know before upgrading to 11.124. Earlier this month, we rolled out a new blog series called Chuck's Corner, which you can access on our site under Resources Blog. Chuck Czajkowski is our Principal Support Engineer here at Accelatis. The Accelatis team discovered 5 main points you need to know of the newest EPM 11.124. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the GoToWebinar chat window. We will take a few at the end and then answer the remaining questions directly after the webinar. We will also provide additional information at the end on how to get slides and a recording of today's presentation. And with that, here is the Chuck from Chuck's Corner.
Thank you, Brittany. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. Today's webinar is things you need to know about EPM 11.124. My name is Chuck Czajkowski, and I am the Principal Support Analyst here at Accelatis. Hopefully everybody could see my screen. The agenda for today, we're going to go over a quick background on who Accelatis is, talk a little bit about the buzz that's going around for 11.124, give you the goals of what we're trying to accomplish here, where we're at in that process, and what's next. So first of all, quick slide on who we are. So Accelatis, a lot of times people will say that we are a monitoring tool, which is partly true. Accelatis actually does a whole bunch of stuff. The monitoring apps and infrastructure is really only about 20% of the overall solution. Part of what we do revolves around the entire EPM deployment, including root cause analysis, best practices. We do performance testing. We optimize. We have support desk features, and we manage all the moving parts of EPM. So it really provides a complete package for anybody who's working with EPM. So again, we're more than just monitoring. But for today, we're actually not talking about the Accelatis extension suite. We are on the blocks and getting ready to go for EPM version 11.124. So a couple of months ago, the new version of EPM hit OTN. They released the install executables, but they did not release any documentation with it, which was kind of fun and interesting. So everybody sort of scooped up that first set and went off to the races. The first EPM installations for 11.124 that we did, we built it on a Windows 2012 and SQL 2012 platform, which is new. So the EPM suite has not upgraded the database or the operating system versions that they support, but finally we're up to 2012, which is good. So we built our images based on that. And then before the documentation hit, the EPM Linux builds were out, and everybody was talking about how they can install on Linux, which is good, especially HFM now. You don't need to be married to a Windows platform. And when we put the product up and installed it, you could notice changes immediately. It doesn't take very long. The installer looks fairly similar to the way it did. It's missing some panels, which they've removed. It's got a couple of things that are new. So we did some preliminary testing here for HFM, Essbase, and planning, which is where we wanted to hit. So the images that we use are on VMware. I understand there's some VirtualBox stuff out there. In-house in Accelatis, VMware is what we use. And because we're doing a comparison here with EPM 11.124 and EPM 11.123, we couldn't use our first installs, which were the Windows 2012 versions. So we had to back this down to Windows Server 2008 R2. That way everything is apples to apples. And as a database, we used the Oracle Database 11G R2, which of course is supported by both. And we had several sets of servers that we used. But where tests were concerned, each set of tests were done on the same platform. So again, if I had 2 servers running on a particular server, I did the same test for 11.123 and 11.124. That way all of our numbers were consistent. We wanted to make sure that we got, again, an apples-to-apples type comparison. So what we did was we set up our servers, we designed some tests and some metrics, we executed those tests and analyzed the results. And again, this was all trying to see, really what EPM 11.124 means, for performance. So the goal was to gain some familiarity with the new version. We wanted to benchmark the new version and compare with EPM 11.123. I'm not sure how many of you out there have seen any of the presentations for 11.124, but the ones that I've seen, they tend to compare 11.124 against very old versions, let's say EPM 11.121, and the benchmarks that I've seen have been those older versions, compared to EPM 11.124 running on an Accelatis box, or something that you really can't get next to each other and say, well, this is X amount faster, because again, it's just not fair. It's much newer hardware, much newer infrastructure on the EPM side. So we wanted to make sure that we benchmarked it against the most recent version. I think that'll help gauge really what it does. Report the findings to the community and present a few key things that we found in the process. So the very first thing that jumps right out at you from our standpoint was what happened to the HFM processes. Now, anybody out there that works with HFM knows that these executables and these processes have been the same, for a long, long time. But HFM now has new names for the processes that are running. The new name is XFM DataSource.exe. Obviously, if that's a Linux flavor, it's a .sh. And then you've also got an HFM Java process that's going to manage all of the data sources. And that name is dynamic based on the instance. So if your instance of EPM is EPM System 1, then your process has the name HYS9 Financial Management Java Server _ EPM System 1. So clearly it's nothing that you can set as a static entry, but depending on what your environment is, you'll know what the name is when you look at it. So clearly the renaming of the processes are going to have an impact on existing monitoring tools, and that's whether you're using Accelatis or not. You're going to have to go through and recatalog what jobs you have running, which ones are looking at these processes, and make those changes so that it's finding the right processes. So it's an obvious effect on existing scripts that take any kind of an action on those processes. Again, almost everybody's got a restart script or something that they run all the time. So if you're moving up to HFM 11.124, those scripts will clearly need to be modified and changed so that the new processes are reflected in them. There's a whole bunch of processes that no longer exist in HFM 11.124. They are the CAS security.exe, which is the old process that took care of the logins and the security. Your HSX server process, HSV data source, those are gone. There is no HFM service process either, although HFM does have a registry setting in 11.124 that enables you to start all of your applications when HFM starts up. But again, it's not a service in the way that it's going to run an executable. And also the DME listener no longer exists in 11.124. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the Essbase scripts, and they need to be modified if you created them in earlier versions. So we went ahead and installed Essbase. We had some applications and some scripts, and we used a handful of scripts to compare 11.123 against 11.124 in the labs. And we walked away with that comparison showing that Essbase 11.124 was actually outperformed, which of course sounded really weird because you're going to imagine that 11.124 performs much better than 11.123. So we saw the opposite, and I'm going to show you a couple of charts. These are graphs that we created using our Accelatis suite. So this is the 11.123 chart, and again, we're monitoring processor time here. And as we looked at the chart, as we ran the scripts, you can see here in 11.1.2.3 that we're utilizing up to 100%, almost 100% of CPU time. And again, this looks fairly good as far as the processes that are running. It did a bunch of stuff. It handled the script we threw at it, and that was all well and fine. So then we switch over to the 11.1.2.4 chart, and what we noticed here was that we never got above 50%. Now, the percentage that you're seeing here is total CPU time. It's not a single CPU, but rather the total of all CPUs. So we never saw it go above 50%, which was really strange. And again, because of that bottleneck in the CPU, it took much longer to run this script. So we peeled into the changes a little bit, and what we found was that 11.1.2.4 has some additional commands that you need to change in your script in order for it to take advantage of the CPU. So again, running these same scripts against 11.1.2.3, it just used whatever it had available to it. Everything worked correctly, but 11.1.2.4, you explicitly have to tell it how many CPUs to use or how many cores to use while it's executing these things. And again, the new setting is worker threads, and the scripts that we were using had something called calc parallel, which again, if we wanted it to use all four, we would need to specify that in the script. So again, the important point here being that if you do have existing scripts for Essbase and you're planning on going up to EPM 11.1.2.4, you absolutely want to read through all the changes, all the script changes, the new commands, and you want to make sure that you've got all those in place for your testing, or else you might get some skewed results, just like we did. All right, the next thing that we wanted to bring up was that HFM now uses ODL, and there's no more HFMErrorLog viewer. So I'm sure everybody knows ODL is the Oracle standard, the Oracle diagnostic logging. All of the products use ODL, with the exception of HFM, always had its own logging. Essbase also has its own logging. But again, HFM now is purely ODL. There's no more HFM event log.log. So each application has its own log. I've piped out the path to where that log exists. I'm sure if you load it up, you will also find where these logs sit. But again, they're all ODL. And the system messages in Workspace is where you're going to go now to see the information that's in the HFM logs, which is okay. Again, it's a little bit cumbersome to use it as far as filtering. You can only see a certain number of entries on the page before you have to page over. And depending on what you're looking for in the log, it's not necessarily the quickest way. Again, if you're used to the old HFM log viewer, it's different. It's going to be tough to get used to it. But again, the information's in there. So what I did was I went ahead and took a quick screenshot in case you've not been in the UI to look at logs. But this is sort of what it looks like, and you've got your little filter section over off to the right. You can look at certain time frames. Again, it certainly does what it's supposed to do, but I found it a little hard to maneuver around, so that's something that certainly you'll have to get used to. This here is a screenshot of the HFM log directory under diagnostics, just to show you, again, the ODL logging and how each application does have its own ODL log. And then on the right side of the screen, I've got a quick screenshot of the WebLogic application. So HFM now runs as pure Java. It runs as an application in WebLogic. And again, you would be used to these logs for anything else, planning, shared services, etc. So in this case now you've got HFM in the mix with the same set of logs under your WebLogic domain. And this is just a quick view of what the actual HFM ODL log looks like. again, the structure of ODL is the same. There's a certain set of standards that is used. If you're used to seeing the HSV event log, looks much different. The information is still in there, but if you've got anything that goes in and parses logs, or any processes that go in and search for it, then certainly you're going to have to modify those in 11.1.2.4. All right, the fourth thing that we wanted to bring up was the fact that 11.1.2.4 does seem to serve up the user content faster. So you would like to think that the new release does things faster, better, and in this case we did simulation testing on 11.1.2.3. The execution time we found depends less on the load, and what I mean by that is if you were to do one thing on the server and it takes X amount of seconds to complete, you would think that if you did 20 things at the same time on the server, that your execution time would suffer a little bit. But in this case, for HFM, it didn't really matter how many things we were throwing at it. It always had the same execution time. So the average execution time was more regular as we cranked the concurrency up. So depending on how many users we went up, 5, 10, 20, 50, it really didn't matter. But when we reached the breaking point of the system, we had to restart all of the HFM processes in order to perform another test. So basically what that means is, we would load the system up as much as possible until that point that the system was taking more time to fulfill the request than it could in processing it. And again, at that point, the system broke, and we could not perform another test until we restarted everything. And I'm going to show you the graph really quick on that 11.1.2.3 test. So as you see, here we move from left to right on the chart, and we're focused on the red line, which is our testing of an HFM document being opened. And you can see the average time for this was almost 11 seconds. And that line really stays steady. At the very top, you can see we loaded 20 users, 40, 60, 80. Everything was fine until we hit 120. We started seeing a little bit of a fluctuation. And again, at 150 users, we broke the system so that it could not process anything more. So we've got another chart to show you here on that 11.1.2.3 test. And this one shows a number of items, but the interesting thing here is that, again, once we broke the system, it really got squirrely. It's almost like it couldn't recover. And again, once we hit that wall, everything had to be restarted. So now let's jump over to 11.1.2.4, where we actually saw the breakpoint around the same amount of users. So both systems broke at 150 user activities. Now, when I say user activities, again, you've got to picture that our test systems are running not only the EPM software, but the database as well. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on a single box, sitting on a virtual image. There's another operating system on top of that to run VMware. So I am quite positive that you will be able to get more than 150 user activities per minute. But in our testing, it was interesting that they both failed at the same point. So it's not that 11.1.2.4 could necessarily handle more users, but the more interesting thing is after we broke the system at 150 users, the recovery for 11.1.2.4 was simply to stop pushing it. So we didn't have to restart the processes. 11.1.2.4 did a really good job at cycling down the work that we had thrown at it. And once it was down to a point where there was no work left to do, if we started our test back up again, it would gracefully pick that test up and start doing the work, which was pretty nice. Again, I'm sure anybody out there that runs HFM has restarted an HSV data source once or twice. So it was good to see that it was resilient. And I'll show you the graphs for 11.1.2.4. And again, we're looking for the document open, and in this graph it's green. But if you remember, the average time in 11.1.2.3 on the last chart was almost 11 seconds. And the average time for the HFM document open in 11.1.2.4, we've got it down to 4.5 seconds, which I thought was really significant. And again, the architecture for HFM is all Java now. So there's many less pieces to the puzzle. So when you're asking HFM to open a document, it takes maybe 2 hops where before it had to take 5 or 6. So that was pretty good. And again, this same chart, if you remember on the 11.1.2.3 chart, it got really squirrely at the end. It just really couldn't handle anything. But in this chart, if you see the blue line, so as the total tests go up and the concurrency goes up, again, it just handled whatever we threw at it. If we threw more at it, it used more resources. The curve on 11.1.2.4 is much, much better. And again, we were more impressed at the way it handled traffic as we threw it out. And thing number 5 that I want to cover is the HFM consolidation performance. And it's not just hype. So 11.1.2.4 outperforms 11.1.2.3 by a lot. If you remember at the beginning of the broadcast, I talked about some of the Oracle presentations that I've seen, and they always talk about old versions running against this new version, and the old stuff is running on Server 2008, where the new stuff is running on Accelatis, and that's all well and fine. But even in an apples-to-apples comparison, we really noticed a giant difference between 11.1.2.3 and 11.1.2.4. So the head-to-head consolidations were really different. So I've got 3 consolidations that we ran. We ran a bunch more than that. But this information is pretty consistent with what we saw. So in 3 consolidations, you could see 57% faster on the first one. Another one was 43% faster. Another one was 41% faster. And really for the application here, I want to say that we chose maybe anywhere from 1 month of consolidations to 4 or 5 months. Not a gigantic application, but certainly enough to put some stress on the system. And again, very different. I'll show you here too. The last consolidation that we did, we simply took away CPUs. So where we were running 8 CPUs on our testing, we just lowered that number to 2 and said, well, let's see what happens here. And it's funny, in both cases, it took the same amount of time off, which was 20 seconds. Not sure what that tells us about the threading, but again, the resource utilization was fairly the same, but the times are just so vastly different. Again, you can see with 8 CPUs, something that took 404 seconds on 11.1.2.3 took only 230 seconds in 11.1.2.4. So again, this is across the board. Almost any consolidation we ran, we really saw the same type of result. So the all-in-one sandbox testing, again, when you look at these numbers in our testing, we're running everything on a single box. You've got to take into consideration that there's contention for resources, especially when you're running a database on the same server that you're running EPM. Sandbox environment is fine, and what we're really looking for here is the differences between the two, which clearly, there was a huge, huge difference. So we will be making a performance white paper once our benchmark testing is complete and all the information is compiled into a user digestible format. We will have that for you. And the Accelatis modules for 11.1.2.4 will be available in the next GA release. Of course, as soon as this came out, we're coding here to be ready for it. And again, our testing and graphs show that we certainly can handle 11.1.2.4 as it comes out. So in conclusion, if HFM performance is at all important to you and your organization, you absolutely need to get EPM 11.1.2.4 up in your test environment. The installation and configuration for it is not very difficult. Very similar to 11.1.2.3. Obviously, some of the pieces are different, but again, I would urge you to pop it up and put your own application up to the test. I think you'd be surprised to see the performance improvements. The API sets have changed dramatically. Again, HFM no longer depends on Windows, so it's all Java-based, and the Java APIs are completely different than anything you have. If you've got any kind of custom code that you've written to do any kind of actions against HFM, certainly you've got to review the new APIs and get that testing in there. And there's also the improved control over the system, which can really help tune the environment to your own needs. So in HFM 11.1.2.4, there is an interface in the consolidation administration page, which allows you to make all kinds of performance tuning changes right to the registry. So all those changes are actually kept in the EPM registry. You could certainly override any of them based on application or based on server, much in the same way that you did in earlier versions of HFM. But again, it's a nice GUI interface. You can make changes there, and I think they've done a good job. We didn't tune anything for any of our testing, by the way. This was all out of the box setup. So without any modification, this was, again, what we felt was a head-to-head, apples-to-apples type comparison between the two environments. So that concludes the information that I wanted to get out to you guys. I appreciate you signing up for the webinar and watching. For a copy of the presentation or more information on Accelatis or any of our testing, you could contact Cameron Morris. I've got Cameron's email address up on the screen. And I also want to just take a moment to let you know that the next Accelatis webinar event is happening on April 28th, and it's a regression testing deep dive. Jonathan Barry, who's the CEO here, is going to give that presentation. And if you want to be up to speed on any of our webinars or information, you can go to the link that I have there, which is accelatis.com/webinars. If you leave the webinars part off, you get a whole bunch more information on who we are, what we do, and what we have coming up. And the last thing I wanted to mention was just to follow us on Twitter. So Accelatis has been on Twitter for a while. I have not. So I do have a Twitter account now, which is @AccelatiusChuck, if you want to follow me. Parts of this presentation were part of my first entries there to Twitter, and hopefully I'll do more of that. We also have a blog section on the web page if you're interested in following. I have my Chuck's Corner blog. I know Jonathan's got a blog out there. We've got a whole bunch of people here that are just chomping at the bit to get some information up to you guys. So go ahead and visit the website and see what information we have up there. I don't know if we have time for anything going on here. I'm going to see if we've got any questions from anybody. So as far as planning tests, have you tested anything on planning? All right. Planning in 11.1.2.4, where they always had that planning sample basic application, it actually doesn't exist anymore. In 11.1.2.4, planning has a sample application called Vision. So we wanted to stay away from testing planning because, again, we didn't feel like we had a head-to-head comparison. But as soon as we can get an app that we know is the same on both, we will certainly get that planning testing done, and we'll get those results out to you again in that white paper. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions that I got. Yeah, and again, so somebody else had asked about the testing that we've done on HFM, if it's been on other products. We certainly will do all that testing, and we will cross the other products to get that information out to you. All right. And I think I'm just about out of time here. So listen, if you do have more questions, again, contact Cameron Morris on the email address up there. He'd be happy to help you out. And I thank all of you for attending the webinar. I hope you found it informational and useful. Thanks so much.